Deep in the treacherous whispering woods, a simple healer's act of mercy sealed a kingdom's fate. Bound by cursed silver, a monstrous white wolf awaited death. One brave strike shattered his chains, unleashing not just a beast, but an exiled king destined to drag his savior onto a perilous throne. Snow crunched heavily under the worn leather boots of Beatrix Hale. Winter had arrived early in the fiefdom of Oakhaven, bringing with it a biting frost that threatened to choke the life from the sparse herb gardens she relied upon. As the daughter of a disgraced physician, Beatrix lived on the fringes of society, banished to a dilapidated cabin near the edge of the whispering woods. The villagers whispered that the woods were cursed, crawling with beasts that walked as men. But desperation was a far more effective motivator than fear. Her supplies were dwindling, and the rare winter-blooming aconite she needed for Lord Roderick Croft's ailing guards only grew in the deepest ravines. Frost clung to her woolen cloak as she navigated the treacherous terrain, her breath pluming in the freezing air. The silence of the forest was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic snapping of dead twigs beneath her feet. It was this profound silence that made the sudden, agonizing whimper echo so loudly. Beatrix froze, her gloved hand instinctively dropping to the heavy iron root cleaver she kept at her belt. Wolves were common in the northern territories, but they rarely ventured this close to the human settlements unless driven by starvation or madness. Against her better judgment, she moved toward the sound, creeping over a moss-slicked ridge. In a sunken hollow surrounded by ancient, dying pines lay a creature out of nightmare and legend. It was a wolf, but impossibly massive, its coat a stark, brilliant white that was rapidly being stained by dark, sluggishly pooling crimson. The beast was pinned to the frozen earth by heavy chains that gleamed with an unnatural, luminescent dullness. Silver. Pure, weaponized silver. The chains were wrapped brutally around the wolf's thick neck and all four paws, staked into the granite bedrock with heavy iron pitons. Where the metal touched the creature's fur, the flesh was charred and smoking, emitting a sickening scent of burned meat and ozone. That was no ordinary hunter's trap. This was an execution. Beatrix knelt behind a fallen log, her heart hammering against her ribs. The laws of Oakhaven were brutally clear. Any interaction with the lycanthrope breed was punishable by hanging. Lord Roderick Croft had waged a silent, relentless war against the packs across the border, claiming they were responsible for the missing villagers, including Beatrix's own older brother, Thomas, who had vanished 3 years prior. The wolf lifted its massive head, its chest heaving with labored breaths. Its eyes found hers. They were not the feral, unthinking eyes of a wild animal. They were a striking, piercing ice blue, swimming with a terrifying, absolute intelligence. And in that gaze, Beatrix saw no plea for mercy, only a silent, defiant acceptance of its grim fate. "You're not just a wolf," she breathed into the frigid air, her voice trembling. The creature let out a low, rattling growl, warning her away. It was dying. The silver was slowly poisoning its bloodstream, neutralizing whatever unnatural healing abilities the creatures were rumored to possess. Reason screamed at Beatrix to turn back, to return to her cabin and forget she had ever seen this monstrosity. But as the wolf's head dropped back heavily onto the snow, a shudder racking its broken frame, she saw only a living thing in unspeakable agony. Cursing her own foolish heart, Beatrix slid down the embankment. The wolf tensed as she approached, baring teeth the size of daggers, but it was too weak to strike. "Easy," Beatrix murmured, keeping her voice low and steady, treating the terrifying predator no differently than a wounded stray hound. "I am not here to hurt you, but if you bite me, I will leave you to rot." She knelt beside the massive beast, the radiant heat of its body fighting against the winter chill. Up close, the cruelty of the chains was appalling. The links were inscribed with runic carvings, human witchcraft, likely commissioned by Lord Croft himself. She pulled her iron root cleaver from her belt. It was thick, heavy, and meant for splitting dense oak roots. "This is going to hurt," she warned, positioning the wedge of the cleaver against the rusted iron piton holding the main neck chain. Beatrix raised a heavy stone she found nearby and brought it down with all her meager strength. The clang of stone on iron shattered the forest's quiet. The wolf let out a muffled roar of pain as the impact jarred the silver deeper into its wounds, but it did not attack her. She struck again and again. Her hands blistered, her muscles burned, but a strange, desperate adrenaline fueled her. With a final, echoing crack, the rock fractured the frozen earth around the piton, and the iron spike gave way. Instantly, the tension in the chains snapped. The silver links loosened, falling away from the creature's ruined flesh. What happened next defied all logic and sanity. The air around them suddenly cracked with a concussive force, dropping the temperature by 10 degrees. The massive white wolf let out a guttural, tearing scream that sounded entirely too human. Bones cracked and realigned with sickeningly loud pops, fur receded into skin, and the monstrous beast twisted and writhed in the bloody snow. Beatrix scrambled backward, tripping over tree roots in her sheer terror. Where the wolf had laid, a man now knelt in the snow. He was colossal, heavily muscled, and covered in a lattice of terrifying scars, both old and raw. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat and snow, and he was gasping for air as if drowning. The man slowly lifted his head, locking those same piercing, ice-blue eyes onto Beatrix. "Foolish girl," he rasped, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that vibrated in her chest. "You have no idea what you've just unchained." Before she could form a reply, his eyes rolled back, and the giant of a man collapsed face first into the snow, completely unconscious. Beatrix stood frozen, the heavy iron cleaver trembling in her grip. She had just saved a lichen, a shifter. She had committed high treason against Lord Croft. Looking down at the bleeding, unconscious man, she knew she could not leave him to freeze to death. Gritting her teeth, she grabbed him by the arms, dragging his dead weight through the snow, inch by agonizing inch, toward the hidden sanctuary of her cabin. The interior of Beatrix's cabin smelled strongly of dried lavender, crushed mint, and the sharp, antiseptic sting of distilled alcohol. The fire roared in the small stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the cramped walls. On her only bed lay the stranger. It had taken her 3 excruciating hours to drag him back, hide his tracks in the falling snow, and dress his wounds. Without the silver burning him, his flesh was already performing terrifying miracles. Deep gashes she had stitched closed were knitting themselves together right before her eyes, leaving angry red marks that faded into silver scars. Beatrix sat in a wooden chair across the room, a loaded crossbow resting on her lap. She was a healer, but she was not stupid. With a sudden, violent gasp, the man shot up from the mattress. The heavy linen blankets fell away from his chest as he took in his surroundings with frantic, predatory sweeps of his eyes. He noticed the fire, the herbs hanging from the rafters, and finally, Beatrix in the corner with the weapon aimed squarely at his chest. He didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly swung his long legs over the side of the bed, resting his elbows on his knees. "A crossbow," he noted, his tone surprisingly calm for a man who had been dying hours before. A rather bold choice against an alpha human. "It's loaded with iron bolts dipped in crushed wolfsbane," Beatrix lied smoothly, her hand steady despite the fear gnawing at her stomach. "I may have saved your life, but I will end it just as quickly if you give me cause." A ghost of a smirk played on the man's lips. "You saved me? Why?" "I don't abide torture," Beatrix replied sharply. "Even for monsters. Who are you? And why were Croft's men executing you in the woods?" The man's demeanor shifted, the smirk vanishing, replaced by a cold, regal fury. "I am Caelan of House Vane, and those were not mere men of Oakhaven. They were mercenaries, paid in silver and blood by a traitor." Beatrix's breath caught. Caelan Vane. The name was a dark legend whispered among the border towns. He was the Alpha King of the Western Territories, a ruthless warlord who had supposedly slaughtered hundreds. Yet the man sitting before her looked less like a bloodthirsty savage and more like a deposed monarch. "The Alpha King," Beatrix whispered, the reality of her treason crashing down on her. "They said you were killed in an uprising months ago. My beta, Silas Mercer, wishes it were so," Caelan growled, his hands balling into fists. "Silas forged an alliance with your Lord Roderick Croft. Croft wants the silver veins beneath our mountains. Silas wants my throne. Together they ambushed me during the solstice peace talks. Lord Croft is a tyrant, but he wouldn't risk an all-out war with the Pax," Beatrix argued, frowning. "He tells the villagers that the wolves are the ones raiding us, that you took my brother, Thomas, and dozens of others." Caelan looked at her, his ice-blue eyes softening marginally with a grim realization. "Beatrix, isn't it? I read the name carved into your doorway." He paused. "We do not take humans for food or sport. Silas and Croft have been kidnapping your people to work the illegal silver mines in the neutral zone. They blame the wolves to justify Croft's military expansion and to keep the human populace living in terror." The revelation struck Beatrix like a physical blow. Her brother wasn't dead, dragged off by beasts. He was likely a slave in a subterranean hell, put there by their own liege lord. "You're lying," she whispered, her grip on the crossbow faltering. "I am a king, Beatrix. I do not need to lie to an apothecary," Caelan stated simply. He stood up, towering over her in the small cabin. Despite his injuries, his sheer presence was suffocating, an aura of raw power and ancient authority. He took a step toward her. "The chains you broke, they weren't just killing me. They were anchored with blood magic, slowly siphoning my alpha authority to Silas. By severing them, you didn't just save my life. You disrupted a coup that threatens both our kinds." Caelan stopped a few feet away, looking down at her with an unreadable expression. He inhaled deeply, his chest expanding, and a strange, confused look crossed his sharp features. He leaned closer, his nose flaring slightly as he took in her scent. The tension in the room spiked, changing from a threat of violence to something far more complicated and electric. Beatrix felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest, a bizarre magnetic pull toward the dangerous man standing before her. She forced herself to step back. "Keep your distance." "Your scent," Caelan muttered, almost to himself, his eyes wide. You are." He abruptly turned away, running a hand through his dark hair, masking a sudden, profound vulnerability. "We need to leave. Now." "Leave! I'm not going anywhere with you!" Beatrix snapped, reclaiming her composure. "Do you think Croft's men will just ignore a broken blood ward?" Caelan demanded, turning back to her. "The witches tracking me will know the chains are severed. They will find the epicenter of the disruption, and they will find you. If you stay here, you will hang before nightfall." As if on cue, the distant, haunting baying of hunting hounds echoed through the timber walls of the cabin. It wasn't the howl of wolves. It was the deep, rhythmic barking of Croft's prized mastiffs. Beatrix's blood ran cold. She rushed to the small, frost-covered window and peered out. Through the thinning trees, a mile down the ridge, the flickering orange glow of a dozen torches was moving rapidly through the snow, heading straight for her clearing. "They're coming," she whispered, panic finally seizing her throat. Kaelin moved with terrifying speed, grabbing a thick wool cloak from a peg by the door and tossing it to her. "Pack your herbs, whatever food you have, and your weapons. You have exactly 2 minutes." "To go where?" Beatrix demanded, frantically sweeping vials of medicine and dried meats into a leather satchel. "The borders are closed. There are patrols everywhere." "We go into the Whispering Woods," Kaelin said, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of the cabin, the wolf beneath his skin rising to the surface. "We go back to my territory. You saved the Alpha King, Beatrix Hale. And now I am going to show you how a king repays his debts." The hounds sounded closer now, their barks vicious and hungry. Beatrix slung her satchel over her shoulder and grabbed her crossbow. She was leaving everything she had ever known, stepping into the freezing dark with a monster to wage war against the only home she had ever had. Kaelin kicked the back door open, the howling wind rushing into the warm cabin. He looked back at her, offering a massive, scarred hand. "Run," he commanded softly. And together they vanished into the blizzard, just as the heavy iron boots of Croft's guards kicked in the front door. Frigid gusts of wind whipped through the ancient pines, erasing their footprints moments after they were made. For 2 arduous days, Beatrix and Kaelin plunged deeper into the Whispering Woods, navigating a perilous maze of towering evergreens and deadly ravines. Exhaustion clawed at Beatrix's bones, her lungs burning with every jagged breath of sub-zero air. Surviving the elements was brutal, but surviving the unspoken tension simmering between them was an entirely different battlefield. Kaelin was an awe-inspiring companion. He navigated the trackless wilderness with supernatural precision, his heightened senses tuned to threats miles away. Yet, whenever they stopped to catch their breath, Beatrix caught him watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. It was not the calculating gaze of a predator. It was profound reverence, laced with a desperately suppressed hunger. During a brief respite beneath an overturned oak tree, Beatrix tended to his myriad wounds. To treat the lingering silver burns, she crushed dried Salix alba and mixed the bark with fresh snow, pressing the numbing poultice against a ruined gash on his shoulder. "Your apothecary knowledge is remarkably impressive," Kaelin murmured, his deep voice rumbling. He flinched slightly as the astringent paste made contact, but his piercing ice-blue eyes remained unwavering on her face. "My mother once spoke of a brilliant human physician, Arthur Pendleton, who shared such advanced methods." Beatrix froze, her medicine-stained fingers lingering against his incredibly hot skin. "Arthur Pendleton was my grandfather. When my father refused to poison a rival fiefdom's water supply at Lord Croft's command, Croft fabricated charges of treason and exiled our family." "Croft's treachery knows no boundaries," Kaelin stated grimly. "He poisons his own kind for political gain, just as my former beta, Silas, poisons mine." Kaelin shifted closer, the intense heat radiating from his massive frame, a magnetic contrast to the freezing wind. "I must confess something, Beatrix, something I have purposefully withheld." Wiping her hands carefully, she looked at him warily. "I prefer the absolute truth. When my kind finds our fated equal, the singular soul meant to anchor our humanity, we recognize them instantly by scent. It is an undeniable magic, older than the silver buried in the earth," Kaelin began, his voice dropping to a deeply intimate timbre. He reached out slowly, gently tracing the delicate line of her jaw. "When you shattered my chains, it wasn't just your bravery that awakened me. It was your scent. Pine needles, distilled alcohol, and you. You are my mate, Beatrix, the one destined to stand beside the Alpha. Silence descended upon the hollow. Beatrix stared at the terrifying warlord, her logical mind struggling. That is mere mythology. Wolves mating with humans goes against every natural law. The laws were written by fearful men and arrogant wolves, Kaelin countered softly. I feel your fear, your exhaustion, and your brilliant mind. Before Beatrix could formulate a rational response, Kaelin's head snapped violently toward the eastern ridge. His pupils dilated rapidly, swallowing the ice blue of his irises until his eyes were entirely pitch black. Romantic tension evaporated, replaced by cold, lethal instinct. "Scouts!" he hissed, grabbing his tunic. "Silas's men!" They bolted, abandoning the meager warmth of their fire. The snowy terrain grew much steeper, drastically slowing their ascent toward the rocky peaks of the Vane territory. Behind them, the eerie silence shattered with a chorus of chilling, coordinated howls. "They are herding us toward the gorge," Kaelin yelled, pulling her up a treacherous incline. Bursting onto a narrow, icy plateau, overlooking a dizzying drop, they found their path blocked. 3 massive grey wolves stood waiting, lips curled over dripping fangs. From the dense trees behind them, 2 more wolves emerged, shifting seamlessly into human forms, naked, muscular, and wielding heavy steel broadswords. "Kaelin," the lead shifter sneered, his eyes glowing a sickly yellow. "Silas sends his warmest regards. Seems we get the distinct honor of bringing him your severed head." "You will try, Gideon," Kaelin growled, stepping protectively in front of Beatrix. To her he whispered, "Keep your back against the cliff." What followed was raw, terrifying violence. Kaelin half-shifted, his fingernails elongating into wicked talons, his jaw extending with popping bones. Gideon charged, swinging his broadsword in a deadly arc. Kaelin ducked the blade effortlessly, driving a knee into the traitor's ribs with the sickening sound of snapping bone. The 3 wolves lunged simultaneously. Kaelin caught the first by the throat, utilizing its own momentum to hurl it over the cliff edge. The second wolf tore its teeth into Kaelin's thigh. Beatrix didn't hesitate. She raised her heavy crossbow, aimed at the third wolf, leaping toward Kaelin's exposed back, and pulled the trigger. The iron bolt, heavily coated in lethal wolfsbane, buried itself deep in the beast's shoulder. The wolf yelped, convulsing violently as the potent poison raced through its veins. With a deafening roar of fury, Kaelin dispatched the remaining swordsman, disarming him and driving the man's own blade through his chest. Breathing heavily, Kaelin stood amidst the carnage. He looked back at Beatrix, who was already calmly reloading her weapon. "Remind me never to underestimate a human apothecary," Kaelin panted. "I told you I was armed," Beatrix replied. "We need to move quickly." Kaelin nodded, retrieving a discarded cloak. His hand brushed a leather pouch dropped by Gideon. He ripped it open. Heavy chunks of raw silver ore tumbled out, mixed with crumbled ancient parchment covered in runic symbols. "This isn't just silver from the mines," Kaelin said, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. "This is from the catacombs of the ancients. Croft and Silas are excavating the Sunforge. They intend to build apocalyptic weapons capable of wiping out my entire species." Beatrix's stomach plummeted. "My brother, the innocent prisoners, they are digging their own graves. Then we have to end this tonight," Kaelin declared, looking toward the looming obsidian fortress in the distance. "Silas plans to officially crown himself Alpha at the lunar apex. We are going to crash his coronation." Dawn broke over the jagged peaks of the Vane territory, but the sun brought no warmth, only the cold reality of the impending battle. The ancestral stronghold of House Vane was a brutalist structure carved directly into the face of a black mountain, accessible only by a single, heavily guarded stone bridge spanning a bottomless chasm. Infiltrating the fortress was a suicidal gamble, but Kaelin knew the ancient servant tunnels. Navigating the dark, damp catacombs beneath the keep, Beatrix used a mixture of saltpeter, sulfur, and dried Atropa belladonna to create localized smoke bombs, blinding the few guards patrolling the lower levels. They moved like shadows, ascending through the spiraling heart of the mountain. The grand hall of the fortress was a cavernous expanse lit by roaring braziers. Hundreds of high-ranking shifters from various packs stood in solemn attendance. At the head of the room, upon a dais of carved obsidian, stood Silas Mercer. He was draped in the ceremonial furs of the Alpha, holding a scepter forged of black iron. Standing beside Silas, looking entirely out of place, but smugly victorious, was Lord Roderick Croft, flanked by a dozen of his elite, silver-clad mercenaries. "Brothers and sisters," Silas projected, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "The era of Kaelin's weak diplomatic rule is over. By aligning with Lord Croft, we secure our borders and share in the wealth of the earth. We are no longer hunted. We are partners in a new empire." Murmurs of unease rippled through the crowd. Many wolves despised the humans, and an alliance with a tyrant like Croft felt like a betrayal of their nature. "An empire built on the blood of our own people and human slaves." The voice boomed through the hall like thunder. The heavy oak doors at the back of the chamber shattered inward. Kaelin strode into the hall, battered, blooded, but radiating an oppressive, suffocating aura of absolute dominance. The crowd parted instantly, wolves dropping to their knees in instinctual submission to their true alpha. Beatrix walked a half-step behind him, her crossbow raised, her eyes scanning the room. "Kaelin!" Silas gasped, dropping the scepter, his face draining of color. "Impossible! You were chained with cursed silver." "And I was freed by the very humanity you seek to enslave," Kaelin roared, marching down the center aisle. "You traded our sacred lands, our dignity, to a human warlord who intends to use the Sun Forge to slaughter us all." The hall erupted in chaos. Wolves turned on Silas, snarling and baring their teeth. Croft, realizing his meticulously planned coup was crumbling, drew a silver-plated pistol. "Kill the beast!" he screamed to his mercenaries. "Kill them all!" The mercenaries raised their crossbows, but Beatrix was faster. She hurled two of her makeshift belladonna smoke bombs directly into the braziers flanking Croft. The powder ignited upon contact with the flames, producing a massive, blinding flash and a thick cloud of toxic, choking purple smoke. The mercenaries dropped their weapons, clawing at their burning eyes and coughing violently. Silas, driven by sheer desperation, fully shifted into a massive grey wolf and launched himself at Kaelin. The two alphas collided with a sickening crunch of bone and muscle. The fight was brutal, a feral clash of teeth and claws that tore through the ceremonial banners and shattered the stone floor. But Silas was fighting for stolen power. Kaelin was fighting for his life, his throne, and his mate. With a devastating strike, Kaelin caught Silas by the throat, pinning him to the obsidian dais. He did not kill him. Instead, he forced the traitor into submission, his alpha aura pressing down so heavily that several wolves in the room whimpered in sympathy. Silas, defeated and humiliated, shifted back to human form, coughing up blood. Beatrix, meanwhile, had leveled her crossbow at Lord Croft, who was stumbling out of the toxic smoke, his pistol raised blindly. "Drop it, Croft," Beatrix ordered, her voice cutting through the din of the hall. Croft blinked away tears, focusing on her. "You, the apothecary's brat. You dare threaten your lord?" "You are no lord of mine," she said coldly, "and you will order your men to release the prisoners in the mines, including my brother, or I will put a wolfsbane bolt through your eye." Knowing he was entirely surrounded by furious shifters, Croft slowly lowered his weapon, his face twisted in bitter defeat. Kaelin rose from the dais, wiping blood from his jaw. The hall fell deathly silent as the Alpha King looked upon his subjects. He gestured to Croft and Silas. "Throw the traitor in the dungeons. Bind the human lord. He will be our leverage to ensure the safe return of every slave he took from our borders." As guards moved to execute his orders, Kaelin turned to Beatrix. In front of hundreds of the most dangerous predators on the continent, the colossal, scarred warlord dropped to one knee. "You braved the winter, faced my enemies, and fought beside me," Kaelin spoke, his voice filled with overwhelming reverence. He took her trembling hand in his. "You cut my chains, Beatrix Hale. You are my mate, my anchor, and my savior." He stood, pulling her gently to his side, turning to face his pack. "Look upon her," Kaelin commanded, his voice ringing with unquestionable authority. "She is human, but she possesses the heart of a wolf. She is your Alpha Queen. Any who challenge her, challenge me." The silence stretched for a terrifying second before a massive black wolf near the front bowed its head, letting out a low, respectful rumble. One by one, the entire hall followed suit. Beatrix looked up at the king she had saved, the man who had pulled her from the fringes of a lonely existence into the heart of a kingdom. Her brother was coming home, the tyrant was defeated, and the terrifying Alpha beside her looked at her as if she hung the moon. The silver chains were broken, but a new, unbreakable bond had been forged in the fire of rebellion. Thank you so much for journeying through this epic tale of betrayal, romance, and rebellion. If you found your heart racing alongside Kaelin and Beatrix, please hit that like button to support the channel. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow fantasy lovers, and subscribe for more thrilling, immersive storytelling delivered straight to you. Let me know your favorite plot twist in the comments below.